At one time, years ago, Native Americans of the Delaware tribe lived, hunted, fished, and settled in these rolling hills in eastern Ohio. By the early 1800s, the Native Americans had moved west, and small towns and villages sprouted up mainly along the valleys of Tuscarawas, Walhunding, and Muskingum rivers. The construction of railroads in the early 19th century led to the small towns like this one called Pearl to grow and prosper. Our small community was once home to a general store, post office, and train depot known as Charlie Station. Today our community is home to about 20 families and one business enterprise, Pearl Valley Cheese.
Hello, my name is Hannah Burch and my family has owned and operated Pearl Valley Cheese since 1928. My great-grandparents, Ernest and Gertrude Stalder, first immigrated to the U.S. from Bern, Switzerland in the early 1900s. Ernest first came to the sleepy little valley of eastern Ohio to work at a small, rough-looking cheese-making operation. He told us that in 1928 he purchased the company and a small house behind the cheese plant. In those early days, his factory had only 2 copper cheese kettles, each capable of making a 200-pound wheel of Swiss cheese daily. The days were long and the work was hard, but Ernest and Gertrude persisted, always looking for new ways to improve their facility and the cheese they eventually became known for.
Like many of the other 40-plus cheesemakers in this area, Ernest had a close relationship with the farmers who supplied his milk. Before milk routes were organized, the farmers delivered their own milk to the Pearl Valley plant in their own wagons or trucks in 10-gallon galvanized steel cans. The area was dotted with small family farms, each producing a few cans of milk a day. Often, the farmers took their cans home filled with warm cheese whey, the watery byproduct of cheese-making process, to help feed the calves and hogs at their home place. Strong arms and backs were needed by the cheesemakers to handle the full milk cans that weighed over 100 pounds and the large 200-pound wheels of Swiss cheese known as Emmentaler by the Swiss immigrants. Dumping milk, dipping and pressing the cheese curds, along with brining, washing, and aging the cheese wheels, required the wheels to be lifted and carried often. So much for the good old days in these cheese plants. When World War II broke out, Ernest had difficulty in finding strong young men to work in his company. His response was to begin to make brick cheese, smaller, easier to handle 5 to 10 pound pieces. This willingness to adapt to market conditions and circumstances has become a trademark of Pearl Valley. Ernest and Gertrude had 2 sons, Bobby and John. Tragically, the eldest, Bobby, died at the age of 12 after contracting typhoid fever. John grew up in and around the cheese house and eventually became the successor to his parents. My grandfather John tells me that he was driving a truck to pick up coal for the boiler and milk from the farmers by the time he was at age 14. After high school, he spent 2 years in the Army from 1954 to 1956. In 1957, John returned from the Army, married Grace Maxwell, a neighbor girl whose father also sold milk to the company. Over the years, under John and Grace's direction, the company made many changes. In the 1960s, stainless steel vats came to replace the 9 copper kettles that had the industry standard since its beginnings. Mechanical agitation improved heat transfer in the vat jackets, and better pumps made larger batches of cheese possible in these new vats and helped to reduce the amount of back-breaking manual labor in the cheese plant. The production of cheddar and Colby cheese grew in volume and importance for Pearl Valley during this growth period. Until the 1970s, nearly all the milk arrived at the cheese plant in the 10-gallon steel cans that Ernest was so accustomed to. Automatic milking systems and refrigerated tanks on the farms made it possible for farmers to milk more cows and enabled truckers to transport the milk in bulk tank trucks much more efficiently. The days of handling milk cans at the plants had ended in 1978. Since then, only bulk milk is received at the plant. A byproduct of the cheese-making process is whey. It is the watery portion of the milk that is left after the solids and fat portions are extracted for the cheese. Whey disposal was always a concern for cheese plants that desired to grow. The construction of a whey processing plant by Foremost Foods Company in 1969 offered a solution to the cheese whey disposal problem for the cheesemakers of the area. Bulk loads of cheese whey that had been cooled were shipped out daily to the Sugar Creek, Ohio plant, where the whey was concentrated and dried into a powdered product with many uses. By the 1990s, whey had become a source of revenue for the cheesemaker instead of a disposal problem. In 2006, the company installed an ultra-filtration system that concentrates the whey proteins. The process greatly enhances the value of the whey, so that the whey has now become an important source of revenue for the company. Another byproduct and revenue source of cheese making is the extra cream or butterfat. Some cheeses are partially skimmed. That is, some of the butterfat is removed from the milk by a process known as separation. This sweet cream is combined with whey cream, separated from the whey and marketed to a butter manufacturer. Pearl Valley purchases some of this butter back and sells it to both our wholesale and retail customers. The cheese-making process begins with the arrival of bulk milk trucks to the receiving bay. The stainless steel tanks on the trucks are insulated to keep the milk cold during transport. Milk must be less than 45 degrees when it arrives. A sample of milk is pulled from the truck and tested for antibiotic drug residues before the milk can be received. Dairy farmers often keep their cows healthy with the use of antibiotics to treat infections and illness in their herds. These antibiotics can be present in the milk if proper holdout procedures were not taken on the farm. Antibiotic residues in the milk can greatly affect the quality of cheese and present a potential health concern to consumers who may be allergic to certain antibiotics. Therefore, any milk that tests positive for drug residues is not received or processed. After the milk passes its screening test, the milk is pumped into storage silos that are equipped with agitators and cold walls that will keep the milk at 39 degrees until it is ready to be pumped into the cheese vat. The milk can be stored in the silos for up to 3 days. All the milk used in Pearl Valley products is pasteurized. This means it has been heated to temperatures above 160 degrees and held for at least 16 seconds to kill bacteria that may be present in the raw milk. Pasteurizers are carefully regulated by state regulatory agencies to verify that the temperatures and hold times are not altered. 99% of all bacteria in milk are killed during pasteurization. Pearl Valley currently makes 9 types of cheeses. Each type of cheese has its own recipe that is followed carefully by cheesemakers to ensure the consistency of the finished products. In 2002, a computerized control system was installed during the plant expansion to control many of the functions of the cheese vat that the cheesemakers used to do with the use of manual valves and switches. The processes are basically the same as they were years earlier. However, the use of automation allows for higher production levels, more consistent products, and labor saving for the cheesemaker. When making Swiss-style cheeses, the milk is separated to remove some of the butterfat before pumping into the cheese vat. Each vat can hold up to 4,000 gallons of milk. One vat of cheese can make over 3,000 pounds of cheese. After pasteurization, the milk is cooled and enters the cheese vat at temperatures of 90 to 95 degrees. This is perfect temperature for the growth of starter cultures that are added to give the cheese their distinctive flavor, body, and visual characteristics. In Swiss cheeses, lactobacillus cultures grow by consuming the lactose proteins and other nutrients in the milk to produce acid compounds that produce the sweet, nutty flavor and or carbon dioxide gas that results in the eyes or holes after the curing process is completed. An important ingredient of the cheese-making process is rennet. In the earlier days of cheese-making, rennet was derived from the enzymes present in the stomachs of calves that had been slaughtered for veal production. Very few cheesemakers still use veal rennet. Today's rennet is purchased from suppliers who produce rennet using strict microbiological conditions and quality controls to ensure purity and consistency for the cheesemakers. After the rennet is added to the milk in the cheese vat, the milk is allowed to set. During the set, the rennet begins to coagulate the solids in the milk. This coagulation process changes the liquid milk into a jello-type consistency. After 20 to 30 minutes period, known as the set, the vat is cut to form the uniform size of cheese curd. After cutting curds are allowed to heal, the cooking phase begins when the agitators stir the cut curds and whey mass. The vat is slowly heated up utilizing steam injected into the walls of the vat. This cooking process is controlled automatically but is closely monitored by the cheesemakers. The cheese curds that will be pressed into cheese are easily distinguished in the watery cheese whey in the vat. Some of the whey is removed during the pre-draw. When the cook temperature is reached and the cooking time is completed, the acid level of the batch is correct. The cheese and whey are pumped, once called dipping, into the presses. 2 universal cheese presses permit the whey to pass through the netting cloth, once known as cheesecloth, and the perforated steel interior of the presses to be pumped into a whey holding tank. The Swiss cheese curds are evenly distributed inside the press to make a uniform sized block of cheese. After the vat is empty, the cheese is pressed using stainless steel lids, air cylinders, and later followed by some weighted containers to further compress the curds and remove the whey from the cheese. The cheese remains in the press overnight under constant pressure from the weights placed on the lids. This overnight pressing period permits the starter cultures to convert the lactose present in the milk to lactic acid. This conversion process explains why natural cheese contains no carbohydrates, that is, sugars. Consumers that are concerned about carbohydrate content of their diets are able to eat natural cheese without concerns, thanks to this microbiological process. Notice the difference in the nutritional facts information for milk and natural cheese. After pressing, the weights and lids are removed. Each press holds approximately 1,400 pounds of cheese. The cheese in the press is then cut into 200-pound blocks and placed in cool salt brine. Here, the cheese is cooled to slow down the starter culture activity and allows the cheese to absorb salt from the brine for flavor purposes. Pearl Valley brines its Swiss cheese for 1 day. The blocks are then vacuum packed and placed into boxes to begin the curing or aging process. After a week in the cooler, the Swiss cheese is moved to warm rooms that are kept at about 76 degrees. It is here that the distinctive eyes or holes in the Swiss cheese begin to form. Starter cultures that were added at the beginning of the process in the vat begin doing their job of producing gas. This process is not too unlike the process that occurs by the action of yeast in a bread dough recipe. Starter cultures convert the nutrients, especially the lactose, into carbon dioxide gas in the cheese block to produce eyes. This eye forming takes about 4 to 6 weeks in the warm room. A trier sample of the cheese is taken for grading purposes to monitor the eye formation and flavor development in the cheese. When the eyes are about the size of a dime, the cheese is moved into a cooler. Once cooled, the eye growth in the cheese will stop. However, the cultures that produce the flavor compounds will continue to slowly produce various amino acid compounds that, if left to grow long enough for 8 to 12 months, will produce a sharp Swiss. The procedure for making Colby-style cheeses begins with the same way as the Swiss, with the milk being pasteurized and then to the cheese vat. Some of the Colby-style cheeses have natural vegetable-based annatto coloring added to make the color orange. Colby cheese differs from the Swiss in several ways, including the selection of starter cultures. Gas production is not needed in Colby, so only flavor-producing cultures that generate amino acid compounds are added to the milk in the vat. The rennet addition and set procedures are much the same, however cooking time and temperatures are less in Colby cheeses. When the desired temperature and acid levels are reached in the vat, the curds and whey are pumped from the vat to a draining table where the whey is removed. The whey passes through a fine saver that retains the small powdery cheese fines for the cheese. The cheese curds are washed or cooled with cool water, and the acid level is closely monitored during the straining cycle. When the curds are dry enough and the acid level is correct, salt is added and stirred into the curds. The curds are removed from the table and placed into cheese forms, once known as hoops. Traditionally, Pearl Valley is known for its Longhorn-style Colby. However, grocery stores' interest in smaller and easier-to-handle pieces of cheese led to the use of smaller forms that make pieces known as deli horns or mini horns. The horns then are pressed in specifically designed presses for the forms overnight. The cheese is removed from the horns and packaged up in the morning so the forms can be washed and dressed for the next day's production. Colby-style cheeses can be sold immediately after being made, but most folks prefer the taste and the body of the Colby cheeses that have about 2 to 4 weeks of age. Pearl Valley is presently making 9 types of cheese. Those made using primarily a Swiss style of procedure include the traditional large-hulled Swiss, the milder and creamier bodied baby Swiss in 6-pound loaves, and the reduced fat and salt Lacey style with its Lacey style hulls in 5 and 10-pound loaves. In addition to the Colby cheese, the 2-colored marble cheese, known by many as Cojack, is a popular Pearl Valley product. Reduced fat and reduced sodium Colby cheese is known as Colby Light, and a white-colored part skim product with less salt is farmer's cheese. Jalapeno and habanero peppers are added to white cheese curd to make the hot and spicy pepper jack. This same pepper mixture is added to the 2-colored marble cheese to make our jumpin' jack cheese. Our Lacey Baby cheese has some of the flavor characteristics of Swiss-style cheeses, but is pressed and sold in the deli horn-shaped pieces. Pearl Valley competes in cheese judging competitions every year. We have received awards from the state, national, and even international contests. An impressive array of ribbons and plaques decorate the retail store, documenting many awards we have received over the years. Wholesale distributors throughout Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida distribute our products across the eastern United States from Vermont to Florida. Pearl Valley has also developed relationships with quality cheesemakers in the United States and Canada to offer other types of natural and processed cheeses to its wholesalers. Cheddars, Munster, Provolone, Mozzarella, American, and Havarti are a few of the other cheeses available here. Although wholesale makes up over 90% of the company's sales, the retail store with window into the cheesemaking area allows customers to watch the cheese being made Monday through Friday during the morning hours. Retail customers are encouraged to sample any of the cheeses before they buy to experience the full flavor that fresh cheeses sold right at the factory have to offer. A variety of gift boxes is offered during the holiday season every year. Many nonprofit groups have benefited from the fundraising program over the last several years. Pre-orders for vacuum-sealed and labeled 1-pound pieces are taken by group members. Groups can usually pick up their pieces 1 week after placing their orders. The program is designed to make the sales and distribution as easy as possible and allows the group to realize significant proceeds for their organization. Pearl Valley products are also available on the company's website at pearlvalleycheese.com. Pieces of our most popular products can be shipped anywhere in the U.S. from September to May through UPS or priority mail delivery. Gift boxes are also available on the website during the holiday season. For about 80 years, our family has lived and worked in this little valley in eastern Ohio, striving to raise our families with an appreciation for country living and the hard work that comes along with it in the making of our cheeses. My cousins and I are learning to make cheese and wait on customers the way that my parents and grandparents have. I would like to close by inviting you to visit our website or come into our store to view part of the cheese making process. We are certain that you will be pleased with our friendly staff service and the delicious cheese that you take home.